Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Dr. Andrew Gazerro, who is the current president of the Rhode Island Dental Association, and also is a very important figure, in my opinion, in the dental profession, because you not only are the president of the Council of Dental Benefits in Rhode Island, you are also on the Council of Dental Benefit Programs for the ADA. So anything insurance related comes on your desk. Take a minute to introduce yourself, please, and tell me if I was accurate in describing that.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on the show. Everything you said was correct. So to give you a little bit of a background, I'm just a general dentist. 2009, non-covered services came across as an issue. I put myself into the forefront to help write that bill for Rhode Island to get it passed as the first state. From there, I took over the council, and I've been the head of the council in Rhode Island for over a decade. In addition, I was elected by the first district to represent them at the ADA on the same council.
I need to clarify a couple of things. Non-covered services that he brought up is his project. He is responsible for all of us around the country that when a patient wants a procedure that is not covered by the insurance company based on their plan. I'm not talking about frequencies. I'm not talking about if it's less than 5 years and you want to redo the crown. I'm talking about a non-covered services. If they don't cover a night guard, we used to have to still give the PPO write-off. Because of Andy's work, now we don't have to give that write-off. And it becomes patient's responsibility if they want to pay or not. I want to thank you for that. As I told you before we started the show, I use this example of non-covered services when I speak about the issue we're talking about today, the dental loss ratio, is that although we did not have a national program or a plan, it helped us. Why did it help us? Because a couple of states got it, then it became 4 or 5 or 10 and 12. And now I think there's only few states that don't have it, and hopefully they'll get it soon. And it spread all around the country because we had precedents. And I wanted the dental loss ratio to use Massachusetts in the same way and adopt it.
So I agree that at the time we passed non-covered services, there was no national version of the bill. We were the first ones to design it. We were the first ones to pass it. And when it came time to start to write the MLR or the DLR bill that we attempted and we got passed this past couple of weeks, we initially wrote our own bill. We modeled it after what Massachusetts had. We presented it, we submitted it, and we were waiting on a hearing when we found that there was this new national model that had been approved or was going to be approved. At the Yankee Dental Conference, we found out it was established. So the first thing we did was we went to the trustees who were present at the meeting and said, what can you tell us about what's happened? All the trustees that we met that day told us that they weren't aware of what had happened. We're getting ready to go in the state with a bill that's already been submitted that's entirely different than this model. So I, like everybody else, was caught off guard by NCOIL.
You guys are a small state with small resources. You're not a California. You're not a New York or a Florida. You have financial issues when it comes to spending money on dental issues. So you need help. And even with all of these restrictions, you guys had some major wins at the legislative session, correct? The American Dental Association comes in with money, and it comes in with resources that you can ask them to help and talk to this politician. It helps you a lot, and we appreciate it.
Rhode Island is 40 miles long by 30 miles wide. When you compare us, we're basically the size of a county or a town in another state. And we're the smallest state in terms of size. Now you have to look at what the number of dentists, the ability for us to earn incomes. There's a limited number of funds that you can utilize towards whatever you're trying to accomplish. So we looked to the ADA and were able to obtain SPA grant money, which allowed us to hire better public relations people, hire better lobbyists who were excellent, get to the politicians that we needed to get to, and make donations to the influential legislators, radio ads, TV ads, print ads. All of those cost money. And if you're relying solely upon dentists to fund it, especially in a state of our size, it's not feasible. The ADA really helped us to promote our message. It wasn't promoting what they wanted us to promote. It really was, they gave us the money and it was use it however you think it's going to be possible to be used. We used it not only for the one DLR bill, we also had a second bill that allowed funding to go into the budget, which was a big win for the ability for us to get into ambulatory care centers and hospitals that weren't being paid for us to go and utilize their facilities for dental treatments. So in addition to doing that, at the same time, we're trying to balance that with the DLR legislation, which we got our message across. We had people understand, and that's really where the ADA came in for us.
Yeah, and I don't want to belittle their effort because they did great. They come in and they give you not only the money but boots on the ground too. So if you have the dignitaries and the staff members of the ADA in the state with you helping you, it means something. I get it. The challenges are plenty, and it's easy for people like myself to sit out there and criticize, but you guys got to live it on a daily basis. So I want to give credit to what you guys have done and your executive director and your immediate past president. Now let's talk about what I think Rhode Island can do for the nation. It is very important for this, our tiniest state, to be an example for the rest of the country. I want you to talk about Rhode Island had a Massachusetts-like dental loss ratio with a specific percentage. What happened to that initial bill and what were your difficulties?
So shortly after the bill passed in Massachusetts, we began to investigate the possibility of having a similar bill here in the state of Rhode Island. The opponents, the major insurance carriers in Rhode Island, came out against us in the legislature. They brought their union support and basically misled the legislature as to what the bill actually was all about and what it was going to be. It got started too late and it failed the first time around. So we regrouped, and during the fall, we began to really repositioning our bill and what it was going to be going forward. Prior to the session, we had our bill written, we had our sponsors picked, we had our lobbyists hired who were different from the lobbyists we had the prior year, and we submitted the bill to the legislature.
So Rhode Island has hired new lobbyists, has a new bill, which is still the same bill as before, correct? It still has the 83%. It still has a lot of similarities to the Massachusetts bill. Am I correct to assume that?
You are correct. It had specific definitions as to terms. We actually increased it to 85% because we tried to mirror the Affordable Care Act. We submitted our bill. We had our sponsors submit the legislation, so our bills were in at the State House in Rhode Island. End of the month of January, we found out that there was a national model for this legislation, which most people know as being called NCOIL. That basically was, I'd say, a complete opposite of what we had potentially petitioned to have take place in the state of Rhode Island as our bill was written.
To summarize, NCOIL, these are state representatives that deal with their insurance department in their state. They all get together and they agree on things so they don't have to duplicate things.
My understanding with the NCOIL was that all groups were invited originally to participate in the drafting of the legislation. Not only were there individuals from the ADA present to give their side of the story, but there were also individuals from NADP, which is the National Association of Dental Plans. So you had both groups present, along with the legislators who were going to design the model, all together trying to come up with what was going to be the best language for a guide. It's not supposed to be binding legislation. It's meant to be a guide for states. I wasn't present for any of those meetings. Individuals on my council at the ADA who are in executive positions weren't in those meetings.
The politicians from every state in the country send a representative to NCOIL, National Council of Insurance Legislators. These people brought two sides together. The National Association of Dental Plans, same thing as insurance companies, and the American Dental Association, to come in to have an agreement, because we want to have a framework to work with. So far, so good. Are you telling me that you, someone who was instrumental in passing one of the most important legislation, which is the non-covered services, was not invited?
You're accurate to the point that I wasn't asked. The chair of my council wasn't asked, but one of the members of our council was present during that discussion. In my opinion, it wasn't someone that really knew, had more knowledge as to what this actually was from. And I'm right next to Massachusetts. I've talked with Mo. I know what happened in Mass. So I versed myself in the bill. We already tried to pass it a year prior. We already have our bill. Gee, we have this guy who's been influential in writing legislation in the past. Maybe we'd like to ask if he's available to come to the table.
And you're talking about Morris Kalla. I want people to know who you referenced. The guy who wrote the law that everybody's praising, the guy that knows the most. But no, let's not even tell him what's going on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that those of us that really knew the ins and outs of the legislation, not that we were excluded, but we weren't asked to come to the table to voice our opinions or voice our knowledge on the bill.
You know, Andrew, we are really good in hiring experts and pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars that they accomplish nothing for the ADA, right? But in this most important issue in our lives, they don't pick up the phone and just say, hey, Morris Kalla, how are you? Let's talk about what happened to you guys. So the NCOIL passes. We all know what happened. We tried to have them pull their support from it before it was ratified, but the NCOIL is here. The NCOIL is here to stay. It was ratified. It has, just like a Listerine bottle, has the ADA seal of approval. In this case, the ADA seal of approval did not have the correct research behind it. It didn't ask experts in the field to help them. My point here is that since this passed, I've been screaming that I know political process. I know the NCOIL agreement is just a framework, but our politicians are lazy. Our politicians don't want to work more than they have to. Someone like Andrew and his team can write the most beautiful piece of legislation to be passed. The politicians are going to look at it. Okay, first of all, who donated to my campaign? Second of all, we already have something your own organization approved. Why should we do this? I want you to tell me what happened to your beautiful dental loss ratio that you had submitted with 85% DLR rate.
Sure. NCOIL came out end of January. Our bill was already in, total opposite of what an NCOIL model was. We hadn't testified on our bill yet, and we were waiting to testify. So now we have this elephant in the room called the NCOIL model, which we knew was going to come up from our opposition during the testimony. So the first thing we had to do was, what are we going to do? How do we handle this model that is nationally recognized, that The ADA agreed is a good model, but we have to take that model part off of it because, as you said, people are lazy, and our opposition was going to use it to their advantage to say their own association agreed to this as the best method of approaching this legislation. We have a better bill that mirrors a bill in Massachusetts that we feel is going to be more advantageous to the consumer than the NCOIL model. The NCOIL model basically wants to study the data and then figure out what to do with that data after it's been studied. What I told them in my testimony was, we don't need to study this anymore. I have 20 years worth of data that I've already studied that I can, in an hour, basically get you up to speed. So we didn't hide from the NCOIL model. We tried to push it away and get them to concentrate more on our bill. Initially, during our hearings, they heard us. Goes over to the House, and in the time it goes over to the House, we find that a junior senator from the House side had written a more stringent model based on NCOIL. The legislature said, look, we think that both sides have some valid points. We want you guys to get together to merge both bills from that perspective. We said, fine, that's not a problem. They brought us in. Nothing got changed at the first meeting. They immediately came after me at that meeting saying, so these were representatives from Delta Dental. It was only their lobbyist and only their legal counsel. There were no executive board members. There were no members from the actual people who run the company there. Your numbers are wrong. That was the first thing they said. And I said, well, why are my numbers wrong? I take them from your tax returns. Those aren't accurate numbers. How can they not be accurate numbers? They're on your IRS return. They're not accurate the way that you're interpreting them. And I said, what do you mean by the way that I'm interpreting them? And I'm like, you didn't include this and you didn't include that. I said, but that's not care. Nothing productive came out of the first meeting.
Andrew, I want to mention something that's really important that you just said in calculation of these numbers. I know you said this is care, this is not care. A lot of the insurance companies in the country, not necessarily dental, they try to take money they spent on different things, including charitable donations, into calculations for patient care. That's what you're talking about, right?
Correct. We set out with the definition that dental loss ratio is money spent that you're paid as a dentist to provide treatment divided by the money that they take in premiums. That's the simple, direct definition of what the loss ratio is. The insurance carriers try to add everything that they possibly can add into both terms. So they want to say that we bought toothbrushes and we handed them out at a golf tournament, and because toothbrushes help people brush their teeth, it's actually care when it really is advertising.
I believe when dentists understand details, they get involved and they help out. If you sit on the sidelines and you complain about the American Dental Association, you're no use to me because you don't tell me what the problem is. But once you understand these things, once you listen to people like Andrew, who's dedicated his life to organized dentistry, you can be informed, then you can be part of the solution and not a problem. That was the first meeting. What's going on after?
So they appointed one of the Senate lawyers who had dealt with healthcare in the past to come in and just basically be the mediator during the process. We were negotiating the time frame that we said, look, we realize that there has to be data in this process. You don't agree with our data. We don't agree with your data. We need to have some individual who can decipher. We wanted to have an independent party hired by the state to do this when we had someone in the capacity. Back and forth, and we agree, okay, we'll allow the insurance commissioner to do it. From there, for some odd, strange reason, things went off the rails, where the lobbyists from Delta Dental really got into a heated argument with our executive director and used profanity during the mediation in front of everybody else who was present. And then it didn't end in the chamber. It actually went beyond that, where he verbally attacked our immediate past president, Fred Hartman, outside of the State House, that basically trying to flex their muscle from their Delta standpoint, bully everybody into submission. We came back a week later for the next scheduled negotiation. He was much more well-behaved during that negotiation. We started to work on the definitions. We reached a stalemate at that point. The next meeting, we came back and they were like, we haven't changed. And I was like, neither have I.
I also want to bring to people's attention that this is showing the American Dental Association that you excluded a guy like this who is so well versed on these calculations out of the NCOIL. What you're talking about is that there is, in this ratio that they're trying to calculate for DLR, it matters what goes on the top of that ratio and what goes on the bottom of that ratio. That ratio can be manipulated by the insurance companies, and it's being manipulated for the past 50 years. And they're showing us, oh, we're paying 90% when they're paying, like, I don't know, 65%, for example. This is what you're talking about. Am I correct that you're negotiating what goes to calculate the ratio, the most important part of dental loss ratio?
Correct. And it's interesting that you bring up the 90%, because we had a letter from their prior CEO that announced how proud they were that they used 90 cents of every dollar towards patient care. So during our testimony, we said, if they've used 90 in the past, why are they afraid of 85%? We're asking for less than what they're capable of doing. And that became the aha moment, because it was like, yeah, why are they afraid of 85 if they've already reached 90? It's because of what you just said. It's how did you calculate that 90%? And what we were going to do with this legislation, it was going to chip away at each of those things to finally have everyone have that aha moment. You have to define clearly as to what is going into that actual data that's going to give you that number. That's the most important aspect of this whole thing. Is we always said it's transparency.
So you guys are at the second meeting, and you guys negotiating what goes in the numerator and the denominator. What happened next?
The only thing we could agree on was the charitable contributions, that we agreed that in order to be included as a charitable contribution, it had to be directly related to patient care or dental care, similar to a mission of mercy. Everything else would have to be excluded. It couldn't be counted anymore. Beyond that, we could not agree at all. So we reached another stalemate. And at this point, we came back to the legislature and said, look, we've basically taken this as far as we can take it. We've agreed on all of these parts of the bill, but I cannot let this part go, because this is fluff. It's going to allow them to skew the numbers to their advantage. And that's the whole purpose of the bill, was to prevent them from doing this. The Speaker of the House, who holds all the power really at the legislature, said, look, I'm going to give you guys one more chance to come back and do this. If not, then the bill that's it. It's not complete. We can't agree. You're going to be back to doing this. So we said, okay, we'll agree to meet one more time to discuss this final term to put things together. And he's on the House side. He chose his representation, his lawyer on the Senate side, who was a former Blue Cross Blue Shield executive. As we started to give our arguments against all of the things, because it was an insurance lobbyist speaking to a former insurance executive, she unfortunately saw the insurance side of fraud. We even told her it's called value incentives, but there's no value incentive that goes into the calculation for this. It's a bonus program. I said, there's no value incentives. So this was her quote, but value incentives are important to patient care and therefore they should be included in the calculation. Unfortunately, they got everything that they wanted in the definition. So
yeah, and I appreciate all the effort you put in. I want everybody to understand and know that Andrew and people at the Rhode Island Dental Association literally sacrifice hours and hours of time to do these things. And if you think they're doing it for Rhode Island, no. To me, this was the biggest test, Andrew. This was the biggest test for everybody to look at the process, at what we have to deal with going forward. My understanding here is that Rhode Island had a great piece of legislation on the table, and that had to be literally thrown in the garbage and start with the framework of NCOIL, meaning that we're not looking at ratios anymore. We're looking at transparency bills.
we tried to really keep the number in. I believe that that's really what these bills are becoming, because that's really been, even Mo will tell you the same thing, that it's the transparency that's really been the goal all along, is to get these companies that no one is looking at to finally look at them.
I want to get your opinion. And this is not the opinion of Rhode Island Dental Association, your executive director, or anyone that you represent. Andrew, you have two choices. Dental loss ratio piece of legislation you had with the 85% going in without the presence of the American Dental Association NCOIL agreement, and you have the same one that you have with the NCOIL agreement in place. Can you tell me how you feel about these two scenarios? Was the NCOIL agreement an obstacle for you, or did it help you? And I am open-minded enough to change my mind, because I'm on the record to say that NCOIL agreement made between the American Dental Association and the insurance companies will hurt efforts around the country. As a dentist, how do you feel about that?
All right. So yes, I'll preface that with, in my personal opinion, NCOIL hindered our ability to pass our legislation twofold. One, it's a national recognized council of legislators. And secondly, it carried an agreement that the American Dental Association agreed with it as a model for legislation. So it was tough to get beyond that, to explain to the legislators that it's just the model. Despite all our efforts to try to explain that part, you're trying to explain something away that exists. It's there. It's there for everybody to see. It's there for everyone to read. It's there for the opposition to use to their advantage to say, look, how do you get people to not look? That was the real difficulty of the whole process.
Yeah, you know, these are now two dentists talking, right? We're talking about what affects us. I still practice. I'm going to work tomorrow. I'm at PPO office. I'm as regular as it gets, Andrew, when it comes to being a dentist and operating a dental office. I want the ADA officials to listen to this. This is what we have been screaming about. Every member of the board of trustees that didn't stand up and say no needs to listen to this interview. You have an obligation to represent us, and you didn't. This NCOIL model is not a model, guys. It becomes the standard. It's the Listerine bottle with the ADA seal approval on it. It is going to be thrown at our face in every state and federal, if there's ever any hope to getting a federal DLR going. It's going to be thrown at our faces. It could be 10 years from now, Andrew, and this thing is going to come back and haunt us. Unless we go into the House of Delegates for the ADA and we demand for the ADA to pull their support from the NCOIL model. This is my mission, and this is what we are going to do. Do you have anything else to add at the end, Andrew?
No, I think that the resolution that is going to go before the House is really the sentiment of what most dentists would agree is the right way to handle the policy regarding dental loss ratio. And I'm hoping that once we have that meeting in October and things come out of the House, it's really going to express more of the opinion of what the dentists, and not to say that the leadership at the ADA made a mistake, but I think it's going to really express more of what the policy should have been all along. And hopefully it'll squash the NCOIL model once and for all. But yeah, I don't know.
And I really appreciate your sense of trying to be nice. I'm not as nice, you know. You can ask your executive director. They made a mistake. This was a mistake that now we have. I love Rhode Island, but unfortunately, Rhode Island was sacrificed. Rhode Island people worked so hard. You guys are heroes, as Maurice Scala puts it. You guys became the proof of concept that NCOIL in action means bullying dentists who are not politicians. The guy uses profanities at you guys inside and outside of the state house. This is the reality of politics. So if you give them an extra weapon, such as the NCOIL framework, whatever they want to call it, it just gives them something to fight us on. The National Association of Dental Plans made a statement celebrating the agreement. I'm just shocked. It's a Sunday morning. I really appreciate you being here. Those of you who are not a member of the ADA, when you're listening to this, the solution is not to stay out or it's not pay your dues and not join. I need you. Andrew needs you. You need to join and get involved. Members of the House of Delegates, listen to this interview. We need you to vote in favor of the resolution that's going to be in front of you that unanimously now has been passed by the Board of Trustees of the ADA. That has to become policy for the American Dental Association. Let this be a lesson to those within the American Dental Association that you need to consult experts. Do not approach these issues without complete knowledge. If you do not have a goal to reach, step aside. Just don't do anything. Andrew has the experience with the non-covered services. State by state, we passed it. Do you have anything to say to even oppose what I said?
No, I agree that if you don't like something, the answer isn't not to get involved. The answer is get involved, because you're not going to change anything unless you're part of the solution, and you have to get involved in order for that to happen. It's no different than people who say my vote is worthless, I don't vote. You're not making any difference at all. That one vote or that one little voice carries a lot of weight with it. The other part is use, like you said, use those of us that have done this. Use us as examples. Pick up the phone, send an email, ask us a question. We've been through it. We can give you the answer, or we can at least render an opinion as to what we think is going to happen. And if what happens, at least you were prepared for that. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I want the dentist of Rhode Island, look at your officials and look how hard they worked and what kind of abuse they had to endure to work for you. These are heroes. These are people who we want to celebrate. Doesn't matter the result. It's a David and Goliath, right? I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars versus hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? There's no way we can go to a gunfight with a knife. But what you have accomplished with the amount of resources you had, I consider a victory, and I appreciate your efforts, and I appreciate all of the officials at the Rhode Island Dental Association who have dedicated their lives to this. And I know Fred, Greg, you yourself, you guys are heroes for us. And I appreciate you sacrificing yourself for the rest of the country to see what they have to do to get a dental loss ratio across the desk of politicians. Thank you very much, and I hope to do this again.
Thank you.